On December 21st, 2012, the world waited on its toes for the prophesized moment, the moment the world was supposed to end. After all, according to the ancient Mayan civilization and its grandiose stone calendars, the era of our world should have ended on that day. Now, in truth, many now know through archaeology and research that the Mayans didn't necessarily predict the end of the world. They predicted the end of an era and the beginning of a new one. The cataclysmic earthquakes, the flooding of most of Earth, the onslaught of meteors were more likely just parts of Hollywood imagination, not actual historical record. But this still begged the question, why were we so engrossed with the apocalypse? I mean, I can say right now that I am a cynic among cynics, but there was a moment where even I had to stop and ask, what if? What if the world ended? What if everything as I knew it fell apart before me, unpredictably and permanently? Now, these were admittedly not new thoughts for me. In much of my early childhood, and even occasionally now, I have had a subconscious obsession and fear of the apocalypse. Who doesn't? I say subconscious because even though I could outwardly reason that the apocalypse was unlikely or impossible, my preoccupation still showed in my dreams. In fact, starting from the age of 6, I had a series of night terrors, all involving in some form or another the end of the world. My earliest recollection of one of these is of myself running down the hill near my local library, and I'm being chased by a tiny but terrifying golden alien baby in a UFO. Random, I know, but it was turning everyone around me, friends, loved ones, whomever, into golden statues, the flashiest kind of murder. Needless to say, this was one of my earlier night terrors. But even as they grew more severe and more appropriate to the mainstream ideas of an apocalypse, my reactions stayed the same. A brutal pounding in my skull, whispers that somehow seemed louder than screams echoing from the rooms around me. I mean, only half awake, but terrified. I would run to my parents' room and find my way between them, only half listening to their consolations as I hyperventilated, fading in and out of lucid thought. Of course, the mornings after these horrific nights were always eventful. Half the time, I would almost forget that it had happened entirely, like it was compartmentalized in some separate part of my brain. Other times, that wall of separation was thin, and I'd wake up feeling the ghosts of the emotions I had felt in the night. When my parents asked me if I remembered what had happened, I'd either tell the truth, because I truly did not remember a thing, or I lied, because I was too terrified to acknowledge those feelings. So today I have to ask myself, why was I so terrified of those feelings? I mean, in some part of myself, am I actually a believer in the apocalypse? I don't think that that's the case. I like to think that there's a deeper meaning to the anxiety that I felt and the anxiety that I still feel today. It's a specific kind of anxiety that brings me to what I really want to discuss, and that is what the apocalypse can mean to specific people. For me, the evolving forms of the apocalypses I was experiencing in my dreams were proof that I wasn't just manifesting intense forms of fear to specific things. I do not, as it turns out, have an acute fear of golden alien babies with the touch of King Midas. Who knew? But I do have a fear of the unknown and the uncertainty that's become characteristic of the end-all, be-all. We can't control what we don't know, and that scares us. I know this because when I walk the hallways of my high school, pinching myself to stay calm during an anxiety attack, or when I smile for a camera even though I would rather be crawling in a hole, it's not because I fear an earthquake or a meteor. What I fear is simple. Failure, but unforgivable failure, a personal crisis that ends my world and brings my ecosystems to a screeching halt. Maybe some of you have realized this too. I mean, at some point in our fears, there's a notion that we can screw up so badly and fail so obscenely that our world could end. Socially, financially, maybe even literally. And I assure you that this isn't a new idea either. Even in middle school history curriculum, one can learn about the medieval Christian and their God-centric worldview. Before the dawn of humanistic and secular philosophy, every action and thought was contingent upon a judgmental God, and a God that would decide our fate at the final curtain. To sin was to damn yourself. To err against your religion was to say goodbye to any hope of surviving the apocalypse. Because apocalypse wasn't just the end of the world. The apocalypse was an experience. It was the moment when you realized you had failed and would probably fall into eternal damnation. Now, obviously, a lot has changed since medieval times, but I like to think that between individuals, the idea of a personal apocalypse is still true. Think about the person sitting next to you. Maybe it's someone you know very well. Maybe it's someone who you just happen to be sitting next to, just a transient connection made only by the speech. Now, it's a little awkward, I'm sorry. Anyways, listen, folks. Here's the thing. It may not be apparent at first glance, but they too fear the apocalypse. We all fear the apocalypse in the same way that we fear failure in its most primal and intense forms. And for every individual, it's bound to be different. We are the product of our fears, and transitively, the product of how we view the world. The way in which we collectively define that world is nuanced and characterized by how we can imagine it ending. And one would think that this is obvious, but it's really not. I mean, that's the nature of the beast that is intense anxiety. It's a scary thing to experience because just like with my night terrors, you aren't in your right mind in the middle of an anxiety attack. You see things through a distorted lens. I mean, physically, things are just more sensitive. You know your heart is beating way too fast, and you aren't really sure of where you are or how you are. You can't really do anything about the way your heart is beating so fast. So you try to do something about the way your hand is trembling, but that's useless too. And suddenly in that moment, you feel like you're in hell. You feel like the world is ending. Somehow, you escape that state of mind. Things are okay, or at least better. But you know better than to be introspective for fear of invoking that feeling again. We usually don't dare to look back at such a cataclysmic experience and learn from our survival. And instead, we spend our time worrying whether such a mental apocalypse can happen again. And that's just it. I mean, the apocalypse can probably mean more to us than we initially thought. Remember, the sun is going to explode one day, and the earth is going to die. Civilization as we know it is going to collapse, and that's okay, because it's not going to happen in our lifetime, hopefully. For us, the most likely path to an apocalypse is not even a true concern, and the fears we feel regarding that are assuaged by this fact. The same can be said for your personal apocalypses. They may happen, but living life worrying about their onset is a terrible way to pass the time. The earth may swallow me whole on this stage right now because it sure feels like it, but I have no more control over that than I do if my doctor calls me tomorrow and tells me I have a serious illness. Because heightened anxiety does not correlate to heightened preparedness or even prevention. So the next time you feel like the world is falling upon your shoulders and the sky is crumbling in front of you, I beg of you to remember these words. Your personal apocalypse, no matter how inevitable or hidden, will probably not definitively spell the end of times for you. It will be scary, and anxiety will be there for everyone on the planet. But time has shown and proven that you will be just fine. And you don't have to take my word for it. I may be the last speaker, but I am not your usual prophet of the apocalypse. Sometimes, just like with the ancient Mayan civilization and its giant stone calendar, what seems like an apocalypse can simply just be the end of one era and the beginning of another. Thank you.